The stage was set in the grand auditorium of the Global Leadership Forum. Spotlights crisscrossed above a sleek, modern panel desk where world leaders and rising political figures sat, each prepared to discuss strategies for international development. The room was filled with diplomats, students, media, and academics, all eager for a spirited exchange. Karoline Leavitt, the young American political firebrand, adjusted her blazer as she leaned into her microphone. Known for her unfiltered commentary and cable news bravado, she had quickly risen to national prominence. To her left sat President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, a former soldier, a scientist by training, and now the youngest head of state in Africa. Calm, measured, and articulate, Traoré represented a new face of post-colonial African leadership, assertive, independent, and deeply rooted in his country's future. The moderator posed a question about global educational equity and its connection to national stability. Each panelist offered a response, with Traoré emphasizing the need for Western nations to respect the sovereignty and cultural contexts of African systems. He pointed out that, aid without dignity is dependency, and spoke about Burkina Faso's focus on science and vocational training tailored to local needs. Karoline sat back in her chair, eyebrows raised. When it was her turn, she leaned forward, her tone lightly sarcastic. "Well," she began, eyes narrowing slightly, "Mr. Traoré, maybe if your education system had taught critical thinking, you'd understand the basics of macroeconomics. You can't just nationalize industries and expect prosperity to follow like magic." A hush swept through the room. Murmurs erupted. A few people in the audience gasped audibly. One diplomat dropped his pen. On the far side of the stage, another panelist turned slowly to look at her, visibly stunned. Traoré didn't flinch. He sat upright, the same calm expression on his face. He folded his hands on the desk and studied Karoline for a moment before speaking, his voice low but clear enough to cut through the tension. "I was trained in physics," he said, "at a university where we don't confuse condescension with intelligence. And in my military training, I learned that leadership is measured in service, not in how loudly one speaks over others." The room erupted in applause, not wild, but steady, as if affirming something long overdue. Karoline blinked, clearly surprised by the response. The moderator cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation, but the atmosphere had shifted. Cameras zoomed in on both faces, hers flushed with irritation, his composed and quietly triumphant. The applause that followed Traoré's measured response seemed to ripple across the auditorium like a shockwave. What began as a few claps from the front rows grew into a broader show of appreciation, as if the room collectively realized that something significant had just occurred, not merely a rebuttal, but a dignified stand against a veiled insult. In the second balcony, a group of university students from Senegal exchanged looks of disbelief. One of them, a young woman wearing a brightly patterned scarf, leaned over to her classmate and whispered, "Did she really say that to him?" Her friend only nodded, eyes still fixed on the stage, her mouth slightly open. Journalists in the press row were already typing furiously. Cameras pivoted. One outlet's boom mic barely caught a muffled comment from a reporter, "This is going to be headline news before the end of the night." A CNN producer spoke rapidly into her earpiece, directing her team to prepare a breaking news graphic. Back on stage, Karoline shifted in her seat. Her polished confidence had given way to a visible discomfort. She glanced sideways, then forward, but avoided looking directly at Traoré. Her expression hovered between defiance and doubt, as though unsure whether to double down or walk back. The moderator leaned forward, his voice carefully neutral but edged with tension. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, "just to clarify, are you suggesting that President Traoré is unqualified to speak on economic development because of his academic background?" A heavy silence returned. The audience waited. No one moved. A few cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of hesitation in Karoline's eyes. She cleared her throat and forced a tight smile. "What I meant," she began, "was that too often leaders in underdeveloped regions rely on outdated models." It wasn't a personal remark, just a. But her voice trailed off as the audience remained still. They weren't buying it. Ibrahim Traoré leaned forward again, his voice even softer than before, but steady. "My country's development is not theoretical. It's lived. It's in the soil we grow from, the hands that build, and the minds that learn without arrogance," he said. Our degrees may not come with global prestige, but our people's dignity does not depend on validation from Washington. The applause this time was louder, warmer. There were no cheers, no chants, just an unmistakable sound of approval, earned through clarity and restraint. For Karoline, it was a rare moment of silence, a silence that spoke louder than any of her usual talking points. The audience, once curious, was now fully engaged. The tone of the evening had changed. No longer just a policy debate, this was a reckoning. By the time the panel concluded and the lights dimmed, the damage had already taken root. Outside the auditorium, a crowd of journalists had gathered beneath a row of floodlights, their breath fogging in the cool night air as they clamored for statements. The moment between Karoline Leavitt and President Traoré had gone viral within the hour. Clips of the exchange had been clipped, subtitled, and shared across platforms, from YouTube to TikTok to WhatsApp groups around the world. News tickers blared the headline, "Karoline Leavitt appears to mock African president's education, backlash erupts." On social media, hashtags began trending globally, #RespectTraoré, #Dignity Not Degrees, and #Global Arrogance. Prominent voices weighed in, scholars, activists, celebrities. Even a few U.S. senators cautiously distanced themselves from her remark. At a makeshift press backdrop near the hotel, Karoline appeared just after 11 p.m. She had changed out of her blazer, now wearing a dark trench coat and an expression somewhere between defiance and damage control. Flanked by two aides, she stepped up to a podium as flashbulbs ignited the night. "Good evening," she began, her voice taut but rehearsed. "I understand there's been some concern about my comments earlier tonight. Let me be clear, my intention was not to belittle President Traoré or the people of Burkina Faso." She paused, as if expecting a nod of forgiveness from the crowd. None came. "I believe in high standards for global leadership. And yes, I believe economic literacy matters. But if my words were interpreted as a personal attack or disrespect toward his background, I regret the misunderstanding." A reporter shouted from the crowd, "Will you issue a formal apology to President Traoré?" Karoline blinked. "I think I've made my position clear," she replied curtly, avoiding a direct answer. Her team attempted to wrap the presser, but another journalist called out, "Do you stand by what you said?" Karoline looked straight into the cameras. "I stand by the need for accountability in global leadership. We cannot be afraid to critique each other, even when it's uncomfortable. That's diplomacy, it's not always polite." There was a beat of silence. No applause, no follow-up from her aides. Just the muted clicking of cameras capturing the moment. Inside the hotel, a television in the lobby was playing a live panel discussion. A former ambassador was speaking. This wasn't just a gaffe. It was a moment that revealed something deeper, how the West still struggles to listen rather than lecture. Elsewhere, her donors were already calling. A major university withdrew its invitation for an upcoming speech. One of her sponsors posted a carefully worded statement expressing concern about the tone and substance of her remarks. Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traoré had declined media interviews. He had said what he needed to say on stage. He didn't need a follow-up. The contrast between their post-debate responses was stark, and the world had noticed. Thousands of miles away, in the capital city of Ouagadougou, the sun rose over dusty rooftops and busy markets, where people gathered in cafes, public squares, and homes to replay the now infamous clip. Radios crackled with updates. Television hosts analyzed every line of the exchange between President Ibrahim Traoré and Karoline Leavitt. On buses, at universities, in open-air barbershops, one question repeated: will he respond? By midday, the presidency announced a public address. The National Assembly Hall was filled, not just with members of government, but teachers, farmers, students, and veterans. Cameras lined the back wall. The atmosphere wasn't tense, but expectant. This wasn't just about one insult. It had become something greater, about respect, pride, and the value of African leadership on the world stage. President Traoré walked onto the dais without ceremony. No music, no fanfare. He wore a plain, crisp white shirt with traditional embroidery on the cuffs, and his signature calm. As he took the podium, the room stood in silent attention. He didn't begin with pleasantries. "I want to speak directly to my people," he said. "And to everyone around the world who has asked whether we are lesser, Because we are not Western, because our diplomas do not carry the name of an Ivy League institution, because our accents are different, our nations smaller, or our histories interrupted by colonization. He let the words breathe. Let me be clear, he continued. We are not defined by where we study, but by how we serve. Our education systems may be underfunded, yes, but they are not without value. Our knowledge is not perfect, but it is real. Our leadership is not about ego, it is about responsibility. The room broke into applause, not raucous, but steady, like a wave building from within. I do not respond to insult with insult, Traoré went on. Because I was raised to understand that dignity is not something others give you, it is something you carry, even when others try to take it from you. He paused again, then added, more softly. I forgive Ms. Leavitt. Not because I dismiss her words, but because I know what it means to walk with discipline under the weight of power. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is wisdom. The audience rose to its feet. Within minutes, international news outlets carried excerpts from the speech. The most quoted line, dignity is not something others give you, it is something you carry. A simple sentence, but it resonated deeply across nations, cultures, and generations. On Twitter, the hashtag #clarity not condescension began trending. Students across Africa posted videos in support. Professors in Europe quoted him in lectures. Even in America, commentators noted that Traoré's response had done what few speeches do anymore, elevate. Back in Washington, Karoline Leavitt's team remained quiet. No new statements. Her latest tweet, posted just before Traoré's speech, was flooded with replies urging her to listen, to learn, and to reflect. But President Traoré didn't speak again that day. He didn't need to. His words had already done their work. In silence, they echoed, stronger than any shout.